Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Environmental Community of Interest webinar titled JB.Langley Air Force Base Ft.Eustis, Focusing on the Future Now. I am Tamel Harbison with the national team at SAME, and I will be assisting in the background with any technical issues you might experience today. Before we get started, I would like to go over a couple housekeeping notes. You have entered the event today in the listen-only mode, but we ask that you double check your mics to make sure that they remain muted. During the presentation, you are allowed to ask any questions you have in the Q&A tab in your toolbar. You are able to download today's presentation as well as the PDH certificate in the handout section in your toolbar. And this webinar will be recorded and will be posted on the Environmental COI webpage at a later date. And without further ado, I would like to turn it over to our moderator today, Daphne Williams.
Thanks, Jamel. Hey, before we begin, let's see who's on the call today. We're going to do a quick poll, so just go ahead and click which organization you're representing. All right, thanks for participating. Give a rundown. Looks like the majority of the people here are from large business, followed by the small business, followed by civilians. So we appreciate you participating in that poll. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce our presentation for today, Focusing on the Future Now. Climate change is the long-term alteration in Earth's climate and weather patterns. Ideas that human activity could alter the climate of our entire planet began in the 1800s. It was too hot, it's too cold, it's too dry, it's too wet. In 2009, the Obama administration issued the first sustainability executive order focused on greenhouse gas reduction, energy intensity, and establishing adaptation plans. The DoD took a hard look at the challenges they would face in response to climate change, asking some key questions and evaluating risks and vulnerabilities, both in the short and long term. The development of executive orders continued with the objective of establishing guidance and strategies towards sustainability, with a focus on climate change-related issues. These executive orders increased their requirements for reductions by establishing baselines and setting targets, required climate resilient designs, and started looking at the cost of no action. Langley Air Force Base was one of the first bases to recognize the impact of climate change and the need to be proactive in their protection of critical infrastructure. They programmed and executed a sea level rise project to look toward the future, while recognizing the importance of collaboration with surrounding communities. Executive orders continue to be developed under the new administration, with the objectives to broaden the evaluations, looking at the crisis at home and abroad, protecting public health and the environment, while restoring faith in science to tackle the climate crisis. It's my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today. Ms. Anhthu Nguyen began her career with the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. As a civil engineer, her expertise in hazardous waste remediation and stormwater discharge led her to become the Water Program and Pollution Prevention Manager at JB.Langley. She later transferred to the engineering flight and as a project manager, provides oversight on all facility designs and construction. Ms. Kandi Brown is president of New Global Solutions. She is a certified climate change professional whose career has grown from environmental remediation to a focus on sustainability and climate change. With a master's in biology, Kandi has a strong commitment to advancing holistic approaches to providing lasting and robust solutions to climate change. She has expanded her restoration experience into climate change adaptation through design of natural and natural-based features, as well as gray BMPs for flooding control. And finally, Dr. Brian Wellington. Dr. Wellington is a civil engineer with worldwide experience in civil and environmental engineering. His expertise focuses on the use of hydrologic and hydraulic modeling in the planning, design, and management of surface water and surface water-related issues. His emphasis is on surface water impacts on large-scale developments, limiting the impacts of altered hydrology and the climate change impacts on natural and man-made environments. Please welcome Ms. Anhthu Nguyen.
Thanks, Kandi. Hello, everyone. I'm Anhthu Nguyen. I would like to provide a quick history of JBLE-Langley before going further into the topic. Langley Air Force Base is the oldest continually operating Air Force base in the world, and the first military base focused on air power. The base started operation in 1918. It is an installation the size of about 2,800 acres and has roughly 17,000 active and reserve duty military personnel. And it is also home to the 1st Fighter Wing and Air Combat Command. As you can see, JBLE-Langley is an historic base with a modern mission facing a unique set of challenges. One of those challenges is to preserve the natural infrastructure while protecting the built. Unfortunately, JBLE-Langley elevation is low-lying with flooding during daily high tides, rainfall, and storm surge events. The majority of the installation is within the 100-year floodplain. As you can see on slide number 2, the installation has endured 6 adverse weather events in the last 10 years, resulted in costly infrastructure and equipment damage in the magnitude of about $52 million. In addition, we've lost many hours of airfield operations, not to mention tremendous personnel downtime. Also concerning is the sea level rise trend. The installation has been experiencing 3 storm events with storm surge exceeding 7.5 foot during the period from 2003 to 2011. Slide number 3 shows the installation heavily inundated with flooding during one of those storm events. To combat this problem, we awarded a contract to NGS in 2019 to conduct a study to identify vulnerabilities in built and natural infrastructure, catalog decisions, explore future impacts, as well as evaluate alternatives, and provide an estimate of triple bottom line cost of alternatives. As a result of the study, NGS recommended several base-wide best management practices to combat the impact of a 1-foot forecasted sea level rise over the next 10 years. JBLE-Langley is in the process of working with NGS to design these BMPs for construction. We are currently working to accomplish this goal within the next 2 years. This concludes my part of the webinar, and I'm turning the briefing back to Ms. Kandi. Thank you.
Climate change. The first is mitigation, reducing and stabilizing the levels of greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. The second is adaptation, living with what is already in the pipeline. For decades, the DoD has been a leader in climate change adaptation, not just in terms of population migration and the resulting conflict, but also in terms of built and natural infrastructure resilience. Adaptation is a cycle. It's not a one-shot deal. We're currently in a state of non-stationarity, and the past cannot be used to predict the future. Our linear approach of predict then act is ineffective in a changing world where we will be constantly adapting. Scenario-based approaches better support the creation of courses of action which are necessary to increase our resilience, but they are highly dependent on the risk tolerance of the people and the organizations using them. Representative concentration pathways are by definition a measure of optimism. How quickly and aggressively can humankind mitigate climate change? These pathways are trajectories tracking exposure, vulnerability, and risk bounds in an uncertain climate. In 2019, AFCAC modeling moderate and high emission scenarios predicted almost complete submersion of the base by the year 2035 if they do nothing. So for Langley, this is not about tomorrow. This is about today, or at least the next 10-year horizon, as Anhthu noted. Think of this in terms of an initial adaptation followed by readaptation in intervals. Multiple climate hazards are evaluated during this effort with a focus on moderation. What has actually been measured? What is the most likely impact we will see in the next 10 years? Can we take baby steps in addressing this so that we minimize the amount of regret we may have from an overdesign? The type of adaptive design goes hand in hand with cycles of adaptation. If done well, FEMA reports adaptation can reap a significant return on investment, up to $6 for every dollar spent. Langley decided that the best use of their resources over the next 10 years was to prepare for a 1-foot sea level rise. The design of those BMPs is currently underway, with Langley investing early and wisely. Brian will lead us through those course of action scenario analysis in detail later. But first, let's look a little more at the features of the base that drive its vulnerability. First, its location. Langley is located at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. This area has seen one of the largest changes in sea level rise in the world, 1.45 feet, and that rise is accelerating at 1 inch of rise every 4 years. The city of Hampton, Virginia, where the base is located, is second only to New Orleans in flooding potential. As Anhthu noted, the entire base and all its entrances lie within the 100-year floodplain. The installation is surrounded by water. Permanent and temporary water extremes from sea level rise, storm surge, rainfall, river flooding, and rising groundwater all impact the base. Land use is tight with very little open space. The open spaces you do see on this map are predominantly wetlands or the golf course. So we're limited on infiltration and storage options. The cultural, historic, and ecological value of the installation are significant. As Anhthu noted, it's the oldest operating Air Force base in the world, and many of the installation's original buildings, designed by Albert Kahn, are listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And the natural infrastructure is beautiful and threatened. The wetlands are impacted from the physical force of increased storm intensity and frequency, and the marsh forests are dying from saltwater intrusion. Langley is the economic engine for the area, with an annual economic impact of roughly $3 billion. The surrounding communities are reliant on the base, and they are all in it together, facing the same hazards. So how did we begin this study? We first inventoried every best management practice that had been installed to date. The goal was to add value to the existing BMPs and not create any redundancy. We also wanted to make the most of what data was already available through regional and national databases. However, nothing is better than talking to the individuals at the base with a wealth of institutional knowledge. So we conducted a round of interviews on what they had seen installed and what was functioned the best. Living shorelines and pumps were highly noted. Then we looked to see what their neighbors were doing that might impact them in the future. We visualized everything on an ArcGIS platform, which could be married to our model output. The GIS included a wealth of information ranging from their ERP and MMRP sites, which all will be impacted by climate change, the physical characteristics of real estate, regional elevations and rainfall, stormwater infrastructure and documents on their functionality, as well as the existing and proposed BMPs and modeling output. The installation has 112 outfalls. Several are tidally influenced, which decreases their functionality. Many are submerged or partially submerged. And 4 are fully functioning. The full BMP inventory is shown here. You can see major underground drainage projects in place at the end of each runway. The yellow and green dots represent buildings which have door dams in place to protect historic or critical operations. These door dams replace the need for 50,000 sandbags and reduce labor and timing to achieve protection. The seawall installed in 1934 is shown in orange, and the living shorelines are shown in yellow. The orange dots are the functioning outfalls, which I noted earlier. Also note the location of the 7.4 million gallon per hour stormwater pumping station. Hyperlinking photos and videos to the GIS allowed users to essentially take a self-guided tour of the installation. This is a view of Lake Langley, which receives incoming water from the southwest of the installation under LaSalle Gate, approximately in this area. The pending tidal gate installation at LaSalle is something that we have to anticipate and model to determine its future impact on Langley. This water body has a direct flow path to the civil engineering area and flight line. Wetlands in this area have been impacted from farming, development, and storm damage since the 1930s. Throughout the study, we were consistently looking for opportunities to improve wetland conditions. Moving to the southeast, we see Eagle Park, an open recreational area which has potential to be converted to wetlands, adding to the installation's nature and nature-based protective features. Moving northeast, we see the Langley seawall and the storm pumping station, which are currently the largest gray and man-made BMPs installed on the base. The pumping system is highly effective in addressing the water once it's on the installation, but the objective of our study was to evaluate courses of action to keep water off the installation. Living shorelines at the toe of the flight line are highly effective in reducing storm and wave energy. The base horse stables are being moved to Eustis and provide another opportunity for increasing wetlands in the north. The northern portion of the installation has the largest wetlands footprint. The installation has potential to add up roughly 30 more acres of wetlands through the implementation of the recommended courses of action, which Brian will now take us through.
Thank you, Kandi. Good afternoon, everyone. Kandi has provided an overview of the existing conditions and flooding challenges faced by Langley. I will now discuss the course of action required to mitigate these challenges. The development of course of action was based on a 2D unsteady state hydraulic model developed within the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers HAIRCRAS platform. HAIRCRAS can model various climate events, including rainfall, hurricanes, storm surges, and tidal flooding. The main limitation of the version of the model that we used was it cannot account for infiltration. However, this did not affect our design of BMPs. The model was calibrated using water surface elevations predicted on the base during Hurricane Irene by the NASA Flood 2. In order to run a model, we had various inputs. These included elevation data based on base-specific LiDAR and original LiDAR dataset. We also used rainfall data obtained from the NOAA Atlas 14. The rainfall totals from NOAA Atlas 14 were increased by 20% to account for local observed increases. For modeling rainfall totals, we distributed the rainfall totals at 6-minute intervals based on a type 2 rainfall distribution. Hourly tidal height data was obtained from NOAA's Sewell's Point, Virginia station. The maximum tidal height observed over the prior 10 years was used for modeling purposes. Modeling extents for Langley were based on USGS HUC 12 watershed boundaries including the Northwest Branch Back River and Southwest Branch Back River, with some modifications to include offsite areas of interest. The extent was divided into 100 by 100 foot grids for modeling. However, smaller grid sizes were used in critical areas. To analyze the modeling results, the base was divided into 5 hydraulic management units based on observed surface flow patterns. These units are shown on this figure as HMU 1 to 5. Initial modeling was done to determine baseline flooding conditions that currently exist on the base. The baseline model included all existing surface water BMPs on the base. AS baseline scenarios were modeled. This included existing tidal flooding based on the maximum observed tidal wave height over the past 10 years. Future wave tide flooding accounted for sea level rise of 1 foot 1 foot above the maximum observed tidal wave height. Extreme weather flooding due to storm surges were also modeled, such as that due to Hurricane Irene. All these scenarios were initially modeled individually and then coupled with rain events of various return periods, including the 2-year up to the 500-year rain event. Adaptation modeling was done to select and design BMPs to protect the base from future flooding. Initially, the baseline modeling results from the future sea level rise tidal flooding scenario were used to identify areas vulnerable to flooding within each of the 5 HMUs. BMPs to address each vulnerability were identified, sized, and included in the appropriate areas within the model. The selection of the BMPs was based on the principle of block, divert, store, and pump. The BMPs were selected such that they could be easily adapted for extreme weather or future conditions by altering their height or elevation. The model was then rerun for all baseline scenarios with all proposed and current existing BMPs to determine the suitability and efficiency of the proposed BMPs. It is important to note that the proposed BMPs do not address direct rainfall on base, as this is currently being handled by existing stormwater infrastructure, as has been previously discussed by Kandi. We'll now look at some of the results of the modeling. All the results that we'll show are of the maximum flooding depth predicted by the model across the base. This first slide shows the baseline tidal flooding scenario. It shows flooding to the south of the base, impacting areas such as a civil engineering building and other historical buildings. Flooding to the north of the base, impacting critical base facilities, and some flooding to the eastern portion of the flight line of the base. These results show the baseline tidal scenario plus a 2-year rainfall event. As you can see, you have more extensive flooding on the base as a result of the rainfall event. Next slide shows the base-wide overview of the baseline scenario with sea level rise of 1 foot included. And this figure only shows the existing BMPs on the site. We see that flooding has increased around the civil engineering building. We have more intrusive flooding to the north of the base. And we have significantly more flooding to the eastern portion of the flight line. Again, we have modeled the sea level rise scenario and couple that with a 2-year rainfall event. And as with the baseline case, we also see extensive flooding across the base due to the rainfall event. We'll now look at the flooding within individual HMUs and the effect of the proposed BMPs within each HMU. This first slide shows HMU 1 and shows the flooding impacts to the CE building. In order to protect the CE building, we have proposed a BMP to be installed at the Sweeney Boulevard, which is a tidal gate. And as you can see from the figure, once this BMP has been installed, the CE building is now protected. We also propose that other stormwater BMPs, such as the ditches within the area, are rehabilitated. This slide shows HMU 2. At HMU 2, we see flooding to the west of HMU 2, impacting important base infrastructure, and also a little to the south of the site that impacts the communications building, which is a historical building on the base. To protect these areas, we have proposed the installation of 2 flood walls around both of the critical infrastructure. And as you can see from this figure, once these are installed, these buildings are now protected. These sea walls would be built to an elevation about 5.5 feet. We're also proposing that the pump 84 in this location also be rehabilitated, including its piping and ditches. HMU 3 already has an existing flood wall that Kandi discussed earlier. That was built, I think, in the 1930s. However, flooding occurs to the north of the flood wall in the marina area, and we're proposing the installation of a second flood wall in that location to protect that area, and also upgrade the existing piping system in this HMU. HMU 4, we see that we have a lot of flooding to the east of the flight line, that location, and also to the north, and it impacts base infrastructure. To protect these areas, we are proposing the installation of 2 flood walls in that location. As you can see to the east of the flight line, that area has already been addressed by the installation, by the repair of a faulty duckbill valve that was in that location. HMU 5, we see that there has been a lot of flooding from the wetland areas down a canal, and this is now impacting is now threatening to impact the flight line. To address this, we proposed the installation of a gate, a duckbill valve in that location, and rehabilitation of the about 1,400 feet of the canal upgrade of the valve.
Hey, Brian, this is Daphne. I think some people are having a little bit of trouble. There's a little bit of feedback with your mic. I suspect it's just from moving around, but just if you could just make a note of that. Everybody's excited to hear what you have to say. They're just having a little bit of a hard time.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm sorry about that. So in summary, to protect the base from flooding, we propose a total of 5 walls and 2 gates, and the rehabilitation of existing stormwater BMPs in the different HMUs as listed on this slide. So overall, we see that with only the existing BMPs, as shown on the figure on the left, base-wide flooding occurs in different locations as sea level rise increases across the base. We see impacts to the north of the base. We see impacts to the eastern flight line and also to the southern sections of the base. With the addition of the BMPs, as shown on the right, on the figure on the right, we see that these areas are now protected from tidal flooding. We'll now show you a brief video of the modeling results for the baseline sea level rise scenario. So this first slide shows the HMUs for the base that we used to perform the analysis, and this the results from this slide only show the existing BMPs on the site. As you can see from the figure, you have ebbs and flows of the tide going in and out, and that's what you see with the blue lines. And these represent the depth of flooding within different areas. As you can see, we have flooding around the civil engineering building and also around the flight line to the east, have flooding to the north, and also some to the south. In this figure, we have now included the proposed BMPs. The orange symbols on the figure are the seawalls that have been proposed, and the red symbols are the gates that have been proposed. Again, we see the ebbs and flows of the tide as they come in. But in this case, we see that the proposed BMPs are protecting the different locations, such as around the eastern flight line, the northern portions of the base, and also around the civil engineering building and the historical buildings on the south. Again, you see the blue color shows the ebb and flow of the tide as water comes in and out of the base with the tide. So now we will look at the model for individual HMUs, the critical areas of HMUs that experience flooding. The top figure shows the results of flooding with existing BMPs. As you can see up in that figure, that the civil engineering building is being impacted, and the figure below that is with the tidal gate installed, and we can see that the civil engineering building is protected. The white lines you see on the drawings are the flow lines that show the water flowing in and out of the base. This is HMU2. Again, the white lines you see are the flow lines of tides moving in and out. We see the areas that are being flooded, the historical building to the east and to the west of the base. The figure below shows the same portion of the base, but in this case we have the seawalls installed in orange, and these areas are protected. This shows HMU3. The existing flood wall protects historical areas. However, the marina is not protected. But in the figure below, where we have the proposed BMPs in orange, the marina is not protected. This is HMU4, and you see the impacts to the flight line, to the eastern portion of the flight line in the upper figure with just the existing BMPs. We also see impacts to installations on the base. Below that, we show the same figure, but this time with the BMPs installed, and as you can see, areas are protected. HMU5, you see in the upper figure, you show the finger coming down that shows the impacts to the base. And once the gate has been installed in the figure below, we see that this area is not protected. So in conclusion, we see that we can effectively use HECRAS to predict the flooding of the base and design BMPs to elevate the flooding impacts. And the BMPs that we have proposed will protect the base from current tidal flooding and future tidal flooding associated with sea level rise. And they will now discuss some of the facilitation processes that we use during the study. Kandi?
For efficacy, implementability, and overall preference. The final ranking from this effort is reflected in the selected courses of action. Overall, the initial climate study gave us the process and the tools to rapidly and effectively evaluate the most valuable options. The gates and walls will be supplemented with strategic plantings and rehabilitation of the existing infrastructure. But the estimated cost for the gates and the walls alone is $4 to $4.5 million. As Anhthu noted, we are now moving forward with the adaptive design phase and generating the specifications for these measures. Our goal is to make sure we understand the spatial and the temporal scales of the effort as best we can in order not to over-design and regret it later. In 2015, Hampton engaged in the Dutch Dialogues Virginia workshop with experts from New Orleans and the Netherlands to discuss solutions to living with water. This workshop influenced the update of the Hampton-Langley Joint Land Use Study in 2017, which focused on resilience and adaptation. The overriding principles of creating value, reinforcing assets, layering benefits, strengthening partnerships, using best data, and sharing knowledge and resources are integral to these efforts. And we're happy to be a part of that process. With that, I'll open it back up to Daphne for questions.
Thanks, everybody. We appreciate a great presentation. I think now we're opening it up to questions. If anybody has, you can put it in the Q&A and we will address them. Looks like we don't have any questions, or I'll give you guys a few more minutes just in case you want to type them in. Hold on. I've got one. I have a question here. How do you define over-design and regret later? Kandi, I think that's for you.
Okay, yeah, I'll take that. I mean, and Brian, speak up if I get this wrong. But essentially, what we're trying to do is understand that there are a lot of uncertainties with what we're dealing with. There's uncertainties from the aspect of climate change itself. Exactly how much sea level rise are we going to get in what rate of time, and as well as there's uncertainty with what the neighbors are doing. Are they going to do something that's going to move the water in a different way as it hits your property? So, you go in and you design the base of a wall to accommodate growth up and out, but maybe you're only increasing that wall height by a foot or two every 5 years or so that you're not investing the money in it just up front and have an over design, but you're able to cycle in as you need it and create more value as you move along. Brian, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I would just say that in terms of over design, the base experiences surges such as from Hurricane Irene. If we could design for that, but to do that would be it would protect the base from tidal flooding, but it would be an over design for normal flooding that base experiences. So you really, and it would cost, of course, a lot of money to build a structure to protect from all hurricanes.
Yeah, and I think an example of that right now are the struggles that Miami's going through with the Corps of Engineers study down there, where they're looking at designing 2 storm surges and possibly ending up with a 20-foot seawall at Biscayne Bay. So these are always things that you're going to have to balance as you're moving along in a design.
We've got a couple other questions. Does the cost of the infrastructure improvements result in a positive return on investment from damage prevention or operational impacts? Keeps moving around the question. Is there a positive return on RAO?
Because of the infrastructure improvements. if they're designed well, and you are not over designing and wasting money, then you do get a positive impact, because, and it's also in cost avoidance from the damage that you're preventing. Brian, do you have anything to add there?
I agree with what you just said.
Okay, here's another one. Really interesting and necessary study. What's the best strategy when proposing climate resiliency studies to the DoD clients?
Well, I think that we're at a tipping point with this subject, and our clients are much more open to the preventative measures that need to be put in place in order to maintain their mission. I think that, really I don't have any situations anymore where we're going in trying to prove that it is happening. It really is about how are we going to address it? How are we going to organize the funding for it? There's not a climate change bucket of money out there for DoD at this time. And, a lot of things are just what you can incorporate into existing projects that are already in the funding pipeline, so that you can make sure that you're building resiliency and adaptation into every action that you're taking. And that shouldn't be a disjointed effort. I really think that, many installations, I hope, are looking at having an overreaching review of these kinds of efforts from one set of assumptions on what are we designing to, trying to get criteria in place that override these efforts, so that it's not just completely piecemealed for one installation. I think Langley is ahead of the curve on that, being able to go in and not just look at one HMU that happened to have maybe a building or a road that was being constructed, but look at the base as a whole to see what needed to be done for the total footprint, and then trying to see how that's going to be funded as they move forward.
Well, we've got a good follow-up question to that. Actually, a couple of follow-up questions. Are you considering the impacts of pushing the water from Langley to the surrounding communities? If so, is Hampton working with you on this effort?
Yeah, I'll take that question. Yes, we are considering the impacts of the surrounding communities. In fact, we are working with folks from the Hampton community in their efforts to design BMPs on their within their area, including the work they're doing on LaSalle Gate. So yes, we are considering them.
Yeah, it's a very collaborative environment, and both the Air Force and the city, as well as the city's contractors, have all been, great teammates to have.
Mm-hmm. All right. Did the team consider using the ISI's Envision's rating system as a framework for assessing resiliency?
We didn't for this project, but we're open to it, hopefully. And the follow-up of what we're doing now, we go back in and we relook at the model to see if there's any new information that's come to light in the last year or so since we developed it. And we're always looking for ways to improve the service. So we're open to it.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, that I will turn it back over to Mel.
Thank you all for an excellent presentation. It was definitely informative for our audience today. Just a closing remark, we do have an upcoming conference titled Facilities Management Workshop. It is held July 26th through the 30th. You can find more information at that web link right there, and I will also post it in the chat right now. And so to view this recording later, you are able to go to the Environmental COI webpage, and we will be sending out the presentation to all the attendees if you have not downloaded in the handout section in your toolbar. With that, thank you again, Kandi, Daphne, Brian, Anhthu, for an excellent presentation, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.